So this is what we're going to cover tonight. How we got here, what is open source? Why do we need it? A few facts about it, how we are using it, spreading the love, and what next, followed by some questions and quite possibly some answers too. Before we start, we all know what a broad church we're in, so I'd like to start by sharing a thought. In our industry, when something goes wrong, we tend to blame the device and not the user. But I've learnt through the years that teaching users is critical for gaining approval and acceptance. With support and encouragement, users can become adept at anything. Habits are not impossible to break. And of course, I say this in the context of encouraging more into the open source fold. So, how did we get here? We stumbled across open source at a Linux Expo in California back in the 90s. We were on holiday and we were intrigued. Even Kieran, who was only young, found it more fun than Universal Studios. In a world where Windows dominated the desktops and there was no tablets or smartphones, this was a world of beanbags and dreams. In those days, the term open source, or Linux, conjured up images of earnest computer boffins, sporting straggly beards and Grateful Dead t-shirts with a strong whiff of patchouli. It was still legal to smoke in public, and I much admired the skill of rolling one-handed. It was no different here. Richard Stallman, the founder of the free software movement, was there, but they all looked a bit like Richard Stallman, so I can't be sure. But that was long ago. Now IBM have bought Red Hat and is migrating to it. Most cars run on Linux. The Internet of Things is underpinned by it. Add to that, most of us now use tablets and mobile phones, and with Microsoft, Apple, Google, and IBM all on board, we consider ourselves fortunate to have stumbled across that Linux Expo. So what is open source? Let me introduce FOSS. FOSS stands for Free and Open Source Software. It's a non-profit foundation and is what it says on the tin, unless you want to get into the politics of it, which I can't even begin to decipher. We all know our software is built on code. Open source is when the coders share that code amongst their peer groups. It's the free bit that causes the confusion sometimes. In fact, there are many flavors of licensing. There's a community one, which users can adapt or modify. It's where the development work goes on. Then there's a stable option, which is usually slightly behind for people who just want to use it and maybe give their feedback. Also, there might be a commercial one with the usual boundaries. The free in FOSS stands for freedom. So why do we need open source? When CERN, those God particle people, saw Dropbox, they loved it, but couldn't make a deal that gave them the level of security they needed. What they wanted was impossible. CERN could not put its data in such a public space. So they turned to open source and built their own private cloud. Now we can build a private cloud too, using code that they donated. In fact, there's a choice of two, and these are the award-winning Nextcloud and OwnCloud. So open source encourages innovation through collaboration. And without it, many of the technologies that we take for granted today would never have got off the ground. Linus Torvalds has changed our world. He started Linux, and old school geeks in Finland know him as the smart one who did the cool thing and the right thing. Tim Berners-Lee gave us the HTTP protocol, which was the seed that spawned the World Wide Web. Then a bunch of geeks built a Apache server, which grew into the Apache Foundation. What was the personal homepage tool turned into the very powerful PHP, and MySQL speaks for itself. Together they gave us the first web servers, a cornerstone and beacon of open source achievement. It's the combination of many like minds that's got us here today. They're all great, even when they don't always play so well together. Right, so let's have a look at the core of open source. Before this starts to sound like a hagiography of Mr. Torvalds and Sir Tim Biel, we all share the values of open source, and in one form or another, its philosophy has always existed. The idea of getting together with others that share our enthusiasm is human. FOSS offers this opportunity to coders. The open source community is global. There are more coders here than in any Fortune 500 company. It runs 24/7 and generates 1 million lines of code every day. Thanks to the many eyes, poor code is found and corrected far quicker than with proprietary software. And due to the transparency, it's harder to hide malicious code. So while the press can't police itself, and politicians can't help being creative with the truth, the open source movement continues to protect its users. Its transparency is its strength. Copyright exists to protect the source. Copyleft provides the method for software and documentation to be modified by the community. There are various general public licenses that prevent somebody claiming somebody else's work, while at the same time encouraging everyone to chip in. It's even effective in business. For instance, Elon Musk released Tesla's patents, the perception being that by working together, an idea will grow bigger, quicker. He said, "We believe that applying the open source philosophy to our patents will strengthen rather than diminish Tesla's position." Before I start on how we use it, I need to share a personal gripe. I think contactless payment terminals in pubs are a wicked practice. It used to be that despite my weakening resolve, I knew when it was time to go home because my pocket was empty. Simply put, they stole my safety net. Cookies are another one of the questionable pacts we are forced to make. At least we now have an open rights group, and let's see how that does. But inevitably, we'll always have to trade privacy for convenience. Going back to the CERN example, our model is, wherever possible, to keep our data to ourselves. On the other hand, we don't want to deny ourselves the benefits of the cloud. And there's a dichotomy there, isn't there? I'll just hold it. So what do we use? Our CRM server is built on LAMP. Our private cloud, data storage, firewall, email server, all running on Debian Linux. We use the CERN-derived Nextcloud and OwnCloud, and what they have in common is that we retain control of the data. We run some of our stuff on community licenses and donate, and for the others we pay for very reasonable license fees. It allows us to run our business as we see fit, and we have the freedom to change whatever doesn't work for our business, not the other way around. So what else? On the desktop, GIMP delivers the power of a professional image editor. And just a word here about the eclectic naming conventions of some open source applications. GIMP, GNU Image Manipulation Program, was allegedly named after the cult Pulp Fiction character. But it caused a few grumblings in the ranks who found the name offensive. So Glimpse became the woke fork. But that didn't last very long because actually it turned out that nobody cared. Audacity allows us to create our own podcasts. Ardour enables to write our own symphony. KeyPass helps us manage our passwords securely. And for bookkeeping, we like the new Cache. We like its simple double entry capability. Also, as all our data stays with us, we can't be held to ransom for the 7 years set by HMRC. This presentation was created on the very powerful LibreOffice, and believe me, the rather staid and unexciting format is more to do with my limited skills than the application's capabilities. WordPress makes creating and maintaining our website so much easier. It's the plugins that cause the pain. VLC is a brilliant audio-video player. It's also, it plays absolutely everything. Blender is an animation creator. It's used as a teaching tool in many universities across the world. And Jitsi Meet is a fully encrypted video conferencing solution that you can use all day, every day, with no equipment needed. You can invite as many people as your internet allows and pre-book meetings too. It's used by journalists working in dangerous parts of the world, which speaks for itself. But there's no way I can give you an extensive list. By the time it takes to compile, it'll be out of date. So I'd recommend GitHub as a great resource. Spreading the love. So how do we increase acceptance and uptake of open source. Well, shoving open source down people's throats, much as I'm doing right now, is not really the way forward. And natural inertia is, why change what works? But the change isn't quite so radical anymore, and as applications are increasingly accessed through a browser, the interface is becoming more universal. And perhaps we worry too much that users might find it difficult or too different. For instance, we recently refurbished a few old Windows computers using Linux Mint. I went to the business to help implement the new system and give a guidance for the users. But mid-flow, I couldn't find the icon to open the app I was explaining. I cornered Kieran and furtively asked him whether it had been installed. But of course it had. And by the time I crossed the room to have a better look, the user had found it, opened it, and was using it. For her, it was just another desktop with little difference. For me, it was just another confirmation that I need an eye test. I use both Windows and Mint, but my favourite is Mint. And you're probably thinking that she would say that, wouldn't she? But I love the fact that I can control the updates and they don't interfere with my work. I just carry on while Mint does its thing. It's very well behaved. And I particularly like the fact that I'm not forced to sign into a Microsoft, Google, Apple, or any other account before I can start work. They remind me of a neighbour who comes around to help me put up a shelf, only to find them rummaging through my cupboards. Why do they need to know what I want to put on my shelves? Linux is a powerful, fast operating system. It's also extremely flexible and private. And importantly, Linux is a sustainable OS as it helps to bridge the digital divide and extend the life of hardware. It's an eco-friendly choice. And open source powers the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So what's next for Linux and open source? Okay, let's take a stab at some future gazing. With open source and Linux, we now have powerful servers and fabulous desktops. We have both sides covered. This is Jack Wallen. He writes for Tech Republic. He does annual predictions, and he's a bit tongue-in-cheek and doesn't take himself too seriously, but it's a good read. And this is what he says, a condensed bit anyway. A large company will adopt Linux as its desktop of choice. You betcha, this is going to happen. This has been building for some time. And with the Windows 11 hardware requirements, some businesses are going to finally see the light that is open source and Linux. The desktop of choice will most likely be Ubuntu, and the rollout will be so smooth it will go almost unnoticed. Once the company realizes how much more productive and cost-effective Linux can be on the desktop, the decision will be a no-brainer. To sum up, I believe we know what to do. Teachers teach to share their knowledge. Nurses nurse to help their patient. It is unwritten but generally understood that the health of the tribe reflects on the health of the individual and vice versa. Now we occasionally lose sight of not only the individual but also the community. We're 7 billion people, there are so many more of us, so we should be able to spend some more time with each other. Open source enables us to collaborate and share our skills and experience. This is not communism, this is equality. So, the future is unwritten, and Linux has already made it to Mars. Yay! So, I'd like to wish you health and happiness. We're sitting on the edge of a new beginning. There's a lot to be done, and we're going to be busy for a while. Thank you very much for staying with me.